Hi, everybody, wherever you may be, from coast to coast and sea to Sean and sea. Welcome back to Ham Radio Live.
Would you like to swing on a star, carry moonbeams home in a jar, and be better off than you are? Or would you rather be a mule? A mule is an animal with long, funny ears, kicks up at anything he hears.
His back is brawny, but his brain is weak. He's just plain stupid with a stubborn streak.
And by the way, if you hate to go to school, you may grow up to be a mule.
Or would you like to swing on a star, carry moonbeams home in a jar, and be better off than you are?
Or would you rather be a pig?
A pig is an animal with dirt on his face. His shoes are a terrible disgrace. He has no manners when he eats his food. He's fat and lazy and extremely rude.
But if you don't care a feather or a fig, you may grow up to be a pig.
Or would you like to swing on a star, carry moonbeams home in a jar, and be better off than you are?
Or would you rather be a fish?
A fish won't do anything but swim in a brook. He can't write his name or read a book. To fool the people is his only thought, and though he's slippery, he still gets caught.
But then if that sort of life is what you wish, you may grow up to be a fish.
Swinging on a Star, American pop standard with music composed by Jimmy Van Heusen and lyrics by Johnny Burke. It was done by Bing Crosby in the 1944 film.
Kind of jumped up slippery fish.
Going My Way. That one won an Academy Award for Best Original Song that year, and it's been recorded by numerous artists since then. In fact, since 2004, it's finished at number 37 in AFI's 100 Top 100 Songs in American Cinema.
You could be swinging on a star.
The great Bing Crosby from the movie Going My Way back in 1947. What do you say we start the show? Hey everybody, welcome to the show. It is Saturday, the 3rd day of December. I'd like to welcome you today. It's going to be a very different show today. I'd like you to grab a cup of coffee or soda or drink or whatever you like to have. Sit back and relax. This is going to be a story of the golden age of radio here in the States. And before we get to that, I want to tell you there are going to be many, many shows that I can't cover because it'd be impossible to cover the thousands of radio shows that were a part of the golden age of radio. But we'll get to the history, not only of radio here in the States and the early days, but also the golden age of radio and the amazing shows that used to be on the networks. And the networks back then were more than just the ones that are here today. Let's welcome some people to the show. The first one coming in, 21st time she has made it. Welcome to Avery in Georgia. Kilo 4, Victor Romeo Yankee. Give her a little old beep beep today.
Beep beep.
Hi, Avery. Congratulations. 21. Well done, girl. Well done. Second up, from Bahrain in the Middle East, continent number 2. That's Tom, Alpha 92 Golf Whiskey. Hi, Tom. My best to you and your family all the way in Bahrain today. Thanks for coming. Eamon Azar, November 9, Sierra Echo Sierra joins us from Indiana. William from Akron, Ohio, Alpha Delta 8 India Tango. Andy Bronson from the UK, Mike 7 X-Ray Tango Tango. Wyden Womarangs, he makes it continent number 4. Yeah, how about that? Welcome, Wyden. Nice to have you, buddy. His call sign, Amateur Radio, Victor 51 Whiskey Whiskey. My dear friend Roger McKeon with Pup Molly. It's good to see you guys both. Yep. Kilo Juliet 7 Lima Lima X-Ray from Spokane. Welcome to the show. There is Jenna, that's Avery's sister. November 4 Juliet Echo Hotel. Welcome. And Greg, my friend in the New England area. Hi, Greg. Webb is his call sign there. It goes by WECB 640. He's also known on YouTube channels as Hollywood. Welcome, sir. Nice to have you. This will be a fun show. I hope you enjoy it. It's going to be a long show. There is so much history in this. I really hope you do enjoy it. JJ from Canada, Victor Alpha 3, Golf Mike Golf, new call sign. Well done, sir. Congrats. High achiever, man. He's done a lot of good things in radio. Andy New, Mike 7, Charlie Union November is here. Hi, Andy. Nice to have you from Britain tonight. Thanks for coming. And the Smoking Ape, what an honor to have you, my friend. Thanks for coming. I mean that. Thank you. It's nice to have you. dear friend, thank you. It's really good to have. It means a lot that you're here. Thank you so much. Ron Walensky, a Northwestern neighbor of mine, November 8 Whiskey Charlie Romeo from the state of Washington. Good to have you. And I think I got just about everybody that's here right now. Robert Varner says, reminds me of Joe Franklin's Down Memory Lane. It's a beautiful song, a lot of history to swing it on a star, no question. Coastal Waves of Mars, that's our dear friend Walt from Poland, Sierra Papa Slat, Kilo 4, Oscar Golf Oscar, welcome. And finally, William Myers, Kilo Off 8, Golf India Mike from Wisconsin. Welcome to the show. Well, hold on, Stuart, Mike 0 Tango Tango Quebec in Great Britain. Welcome, Stuart. Good to see you. Yeah, that's about all for welcomes, guys. Sorry, we're going to have to move quickly. The ARRL is a great way if you'd like to get your amateur radio license or have thought about being in amateur radio. It's a great way to get you started. They'll help you find a local to you amateur radio club that'll help you get licensed and on the air. You can find them online at www.arrl.org. That's arrl.org. Please hit the contact us bar. Let them know where you live and that you should like to get your license. They'll then send you an email back that will have a local to you amateur radio club. www.arrl.org. Show email here is info@hamradiolive.org. We talk more about all kinds of radio here, not only just ham, shortwave, CB sometimes. We talk about the AM band sometimes. And today is a big one for the medium wave or AM band and radio. I really hope you enjoy the show. We do have a topic question for you today. What was your favorite show growing up? Your favorite show. We all had a favorite, right? This is going to go back a long ways today. We're going to go down memory lane, but we're also going to talk about a lot of early radio history. And I know people in amateur radio really honor their history quite closely. They really have a regard for it. This is going to be more about the medium wave or commercial band here in the States, where it started and how it grew. And the big way it grew was through the golden age of radio. Before we get along to that, Joshua Bateman, November 1, Juliet Bravo, welcome to you. It's good to see you. And JJ Larry, how in the world do you remember everyone? I can't even repeat a call sign back without writing it down. You know what? I guess it's a weird thing. Jeff, thank you. It's nice you say. Thank you. It's good to have you guys here for this show. All right, we're going to get into this, and I'd like to be able to just invite you, like I say, to sit back, relax, and enjoy this show. It's got quite a bit of different stuff in it. But for the people who are here from amateur radio, which is most of you, I believe, I want to tell you about a new contest that's coming. But it's not really a contest, but it's an award that you can win. The 12 Days of QRZ. Now, this is on the QRZ website. Okay, it starts on December 1st, so it just started a couple days ago, is going to be making about winter contacts on at least 12 days this winter. That's all you got to worry about. Just 12 days this winter. Eligibility period runs from December 1st, 2022 through February 28th, 2023. All you got to do is just log confirmed contacts during the 12 of those days, and you will earn this handsome award for your shack. A little closer look at it. That's what it looks like, the 12 days of QRZ. Log your contacts, work 12 times this winter, and win a prize from QRZ. That's pretty cool, right? That's pretty neat. Sorry I had to postpone this show. You'll understand when as we go on. It's going to be a long time. And yesterday it was just going to get way too dark, and in this room it doesn't do well with all the windows as the sun's going down. Those windows add quite a bit of light to the show, so I'm grateful you're here. Let's get into old-time radio drama, also known as the golden age of radio. Now, we have to start somewhere, and as radio people, I think what we'll do is we'll start at the very beginning. December 24th, 1906 may not be a day that you might really know about in terms of the history here in the United States about this. On Christmas Eve, 1906, there was a Canadian engineer, his name Reginald Fessenden, and he said to a broadcast the first radio program consisting of some violin playing and passages from the Bible. This is like the earliest availability of knowledge that this happened back in 1906, where he did this. Then in 1919, a man named Frank Conrad, who was a Westinghouse engineer, began broadcasting music in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. These broadcasts simulated the sales of crystal sets. So lots of crystal sets were sold. They stimulated a lot of sales for those. A crystal set, which could be made at home, was composed of a tuning coil, a crystal detector, and a pair of earphones. The use of a crystal eliminated the need for a battery or other electric source, and the popularity of Conrad's broadcasts led to Westinghouse establishing a radio station of KDKA in Pittsburgh. On November 2nd, 1920, sorry, that was when they started KDKA, but in 1921, KDKA began broadcasting prize fights and Major League Baseball, while Conrad was creating KDKA. The Detroit News established a radio station as well called WXYZ, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Radio found itself in a place where money and quality programming was needed to secure the largest share of American listeners. This is very important to tell the story of the golden age of radio. It formed the finances needed to create quality program that the family would listen to on a regular basis instead of going to a local theater for entertainment. You've got to remember, this is back in the early 20s, and this was bringing theater and all of the stories into their home with an electric box, basically. So what happened was there were close to a dozen radio networks in the United States in the early days of radio here in the States, but 3 networks, later to be 4, would create the golden age of radio. On December 15th of 1926, RCA formed the National Broadcasting Company to take over its network broadcasting business. NBC would provide the programming for radio, and RCA, who owned NBC, would sell radio receivers. Their first broadcast began at 8 p.m. Eastern with 4 hours of entertainment, which also featured Will Rogers and Mary Garden. She was an opera singer. This broadcast, which included a remote link from KYW in Chicago, was coordinated through WEAF in New York City and carried by 22 East and Midwestern NBC stations. They were carried all over basically what you would consider to be the Midwest and the Northeast. So these were the stations that were all part of that early broadcast. The first broadcast became on the air at 8 p.m. Eastern that day. And in early 1927, there was only about 7% of the nation's 737 receivers that were on either one of the NBC networks. And there were 2 of them. There was the NBC Red and NBC Blue. Legend has it that the color designations originated from the push pins early engineers used to mark affiliates of WEAF and WJZ, from blue pins and WEAF with red pins, or from the use of double-ended red and blue colored pencils. The fact is, the 2 NBC networks did not distinctly identify or format their signal, their stations. The Red Network got the quality programming. In all actuality, it's a true story. The Red Network got the good stuff, and the Blue Network would get kind of the minor talent and the minor stuff in the early 20s and 30s. The Blue Network often carried newer, untried programs, which, if successful, often moved up to the Red Network. There's a little-known area here. And if you look in the western states of the United States, it was known as the Orange Network. That was as the western United States was beginning to grow in the 20s and early 30s. NBC affiliates there were on the air. So then September 18th of 1927, something else happened. That was when the Columbia Broadcasting System, known as CBS, was established in New York City. On 1934, so 7 years later, on September 19th, the Mutual Broadcasting System was formed. Unlike NBC and CBS, it didn't move into television. It would last until April 17th of 1999, when Mutual signed off for the final time. Mutual Broadcasting System began September 15th of 1934. It was created initially to provide programming for WOR, New York City, WGN Chicago, WLW Cincinnati, and WXYZ in Detroit. Mutual's first programs were broadcast October 2nd, 1934. In September 35, WXYZ then joined the NBC network. It was replaced by the Canadian channel CKLW. In 1943, there was a big deal because NBC Blue and Red were thought of as a monopoly by the FCC. So in 1943, the Federal Communications Commission forced NBC to sell a part of its system to Edward J. Noble, who formed the American Broadcasting Company. The American Broadcasting Corporation. ABC would add considerably to the golden age of radio even though they came at a much later time than NBC and CBS and Mutual. They had great shows. You see Bing Crosby here from the early days of ABC radio. They had a good set of radio stations they could work with, and they had good talent as well. Here's a little look at ABC's early key stations: KGO from San Francisco, KECA in Los Angeles, WENR in Chicago, and WJZ in New York City, where all of these are 50,000 watt clear channel stations. So there were programming on NBC Blue, like Abbott and Costello, believe it or not, that moved over to ABC, and ABC developed shows like Superman on the radio. So ABC had a pretty big part in it, even though they got started quite late in the whole thing. Radio broadcasting was the cheapest form of entertainment, and it provided an amazing amount of quality for people. As a result, its popularity grew rapidly in the United States back in the late 20s and early 30s, and by 1934, 60% of the nation's household had radios. 1.5 million cars were also supplied with them. Now, around 1928 was the beginning of the golden age of radio here in the States. It became so popular that theaters dared not open after the popular Amos and Andy show was on. They would wait till the show was over and then show their motion pictures. And how they did it, let me show you how the radio dramas were initially done. First, the microphone. The RCA 44 Bravo X-ray mic. That was the one that was used in radio. It was an interesting radio. It was a dominant electronic home, it had 2 live faces and 2 dead ones. Thus, actors could face each other and react. An actor could give the effect of leaving the room by simply moving his head toward the dead face of the microphone. The scripts were paper clipped together. It's been disputed whether or not the actors and actresses would drop finished pages to the carpeted floor after use. Radio creation for actual recording purposes, well, not always done perfectly, but they were done on old acetone records. They were done at places like Radio City Music Hall in New York City. That's why it's called Radio City. It was done when they had the shows. They would record them using what was called a cutting lathe. They'd put an acetone radio disc, just a record basically, at 33 1/3 RPM, and the lathe would then cut the grooves as it recorded the program that was going on. It was called electrical transcriptions because of this machine. From the early 1930s through the 1950s, sometimes the grooves were cut starting at the inside of the disc and running to the outside. This was useful when the program to record it was longer than 15 minutes, so required more than 1 disc per side. These are old radio discs, though they're being cut with the lathes. The finished product looked like this, and they were sent out to radio stations around the country. It would be an incredible feat to try and share everything from the golden age of radio. I'll do my best to cover many of the bigger ones, and we'll have a chance to listen back in time to many of the very first broadcasts of these classic productions. What we're going to do first is find out how they did these things, because you had to have the sound effects and the actors, right? Sound effects were done by a group of sound technicians who had many different tasks to perform while the radio drama was being done. They would follow the script and then make the according sound so it would sound like it was really happening. As things blossomed in radio and dramas became more and more active, live studio audiences were part of it. We'll get to that in a moment, but first, let's see exactly how these shows were produced.
Meanwhile, Betty, frantic at her uncle's danger, has undone her bonds and is starting for help in the crippled car.
Sheriff Tom, hurry, hurry.
Betty, where's your Uncle Pete?
We were held up, Tom. 3 men. They took the Flying B payroll and headed up toward Pine Gap, and they took Uncle with them.
Come on in the house quick. We'll get the boys together and we'll go after.
No, I'll take the jitney into town and get my car.
All right, Betty.
Hello?
Ring up the boys, man. Tell them to meet me at Pine Creek Forks. The Flying B payroll's been robbed. Pete Belden's been kidnapped. Tell the boys to ride. Hey, George, where'd you put that ammunition? It's in your desk. Which drawer? The middle one.
I declare, I'll never get these dishes done. Looks like a storm coming up, too. Hello, what is it?
Is Fred there, Mrs. Jones? Chef rounded up a posse.
I'll call him, May. He's out in the yard.
Send him to Pine Creek Forks. Hurry, Sophie.
Fred! Oh, Fred!
Hello!
Posse, Fred. Sheriff wants you at Pine Creek Forks. They're riding.
All right. Go, boss. Steady.
Hey, Joe, we're saddling. Tom wants a posse. Something stern, I reckon.
All right, Fred. Better stop that windmill. We're on the storm.
See you later, Ma.
Be careful, Fred. Hello, May. They've gone. Have you got the other boys?
Some of them. I'm calling the blacksmith now.
Hello?
Burle, payroll robbery. Meet the sheriff at Pine Creek Forks. Pick up Bill and Frank on the way.
I'm riding, Harry. Push that there wagon out of the way.
Where's your pa, Junior?
He's back on the far section with the Reaper.
Hey there, Bill. Get down off of that.
I can't hear you. Wait a minute. Now, what you say?
Somebody held up the jitney. Probably the Hicks gang. Bring your horse. They've headed for Pine Creek. Guess they're going through the gap. Hurry up and I'll meet you.
Radio sound effects that sounded so real, in the theater of the mind of radio became alive. Radio audiences grew tremendously back in the early days when the golden age was just starting. In fact, way back in the day, there were incredible programs that most of the time was news and weather and farm related, but their early days of the golden age of radio started right around 1928. Actually, to be precise, Monday, March 19th. There was a show that was called Amos and Andy. It was basically the very first radio drama that was produced in the golden age of radio. Let's take a listen. One of the early episodes of the first big show on radio, Amos and Andy.
The only trouble is, Andy, by the time you finish reading that there book, the trial is going to be over.
Not the way that I was reading it, Amos. I reads fast.
I know, but that book is thick. Another thing, that's got a lot of big words in it, too.
I ain't messing with them words.
Well, you can't skip part of it, though, and know what it's all about, can you?
Boy, this here's a good law book, you know it?
Yeah, but it's just like I tell you, it's full of them big words.
Well, what's the use of messing with them big words and get everybody all mixed up? Don't nobody know what they mean nohow.
The judge know what they mean, though, don't he?
No. The judge don't know no more than I do.
Well, what is in the book there that's going to help me get out of this mess? That's what I want to know.
Well, now, here's some stuff here. What is that word?
Amos and Andy, back from 1929. The show ran as a nightly radio serial. It was from 1928 all the way to 1943. As a weekly situation comedy, also from 1943 to 1945, and as a nightly disc jockey program, believe it or not, from 1954 to 1960. A television adaptation of the show also ran on CBS from 1951 to 1953 and continued in syndication reruns from 1954 to 1966. Another show from back in the day of old-time radio where people in the family would gather around the radio, maybe the fireplace going, and listening to the amazing sounds coming through the radio box that Dad bought down at the radio store, or that they built in their own garage. This was a special time, and there was a very special kids show that started way back in the day. Little Orphan Annie ran on radio from 1930 to 1942, where it led in ratings as well as sponsor profits. Annie's sidekick, neighbor boy Joe Contracel, helped to make the show attractive to boys, as in the movie. By the way, you'll know this because The Christmas Story kind of featured Ralphie, and his little brother listening to Little Orphan Annie. We'll get to that in just a moment, but let's hear an old Little Orphan Annie opening of the show from back in 1940.
It's adventure time with Orphan Annie.
I wonder what Annie hopes to find out by following Angelina Carminetti. It certainly is thrilling. And say, wasn't that exciting news we heard last time about Orphan Annie's new identification bureau? Yes, sir. Every one of you boys and girls can get in on it and get a keen-looking identification tag and chain for your very own. And so, if you missed hearing about it, listen hard now, because, boy, oh boy, you certainly want this keen-looking, oval-shaped identification tag and automatic fitting chain for your wrist like soldiers and aviators wear.
And that's Little Orphan Annie from back in the day. Yeah, that was in 1940. And the movie A Christmas Story really made a neat reference to this show. And to be honest, the secret messages were not given at the end of every Little Orphan Annie episode. Nope, they were given only on certain nights. Let's take a listen. And, well, let's just instead, why don't we take a look and see Ralphie go through it on A Christmas Story, courtesy of MGM.
Come on, let's get on with it. I don't need all that jazz about smugglers and pirates.
Listen tomorrow night for the concluding adventure of the Black Pirate Ship. Now it's time for Annie's secret message for you members of the Secret Circle. Remember, kids, only members of Annie's Secret Circle can decode Annie's secret message. Remember, Annie is depending on you. Set your pins to B2. Here is the message. 12, 11,
I am in my first secret meeting.
5, 14, 11, 18, 16.
Oh, Pierre was in great voice tonight. I could tell that tonight's message was really important.
3, 25. That's a message from Annie herself. Remember, don't tell anyone.
All right, so then you heard how he gave the numbers, right? Not really that way. That wasn't the way that Pierre-Andre actually read those numbers. And interestingly enough, it was actually Pierre-Andre who actually did that part in Little Orphan Annie. He was part of the cast. And so when Ralphie talked about getting his decoder, ring and being a part of the secret society, and that Pierre-Andre signed it in ink, it was actually true. But how they did the codes were different. Let's listen to the end of A Little Orphan Annie show from 1936 and just cover the secret message at the very end.
You mean, Caesar, you know this Mr. Strong, this big engineer? Sure I do. Didn't I tell you my father worked for him for a long time?
Shucks, Annie, come on. I want to see this man.
Jumping grasshopper, so do I. I'll bet this Mr. Strong, this big engineer, is going to be swell. Come on, Caesar, let's meet him.
Well, Annie and Joe seem to have made some mighty nice new friends today, didn't they? You can see that Caesar is a real boy, too, and now he's going to take Annie and Joe down to see Amos Strong, the engineer of the big new Simmons Corners Bridge. And you certainly want to be on hand to meet him, too. Now, tonight's Thursday night, and that means club night for all you new 1936 members of Annie's Secret Society. So get your pencils and paper ready for an important secret message in Annie's 1936 Mystery Radio Code. Are you all set?
First, remember, we give you the code key. Tonight's secret message is coming in the A13 code. Did you get that? A13 is the special code key for tonight's secret message. So write A13 down on your paper now so you'll remember it. And here we go with the secret message itself. First word, 19, 5, 21, 15, 2, 9, 6, 10, 8, 21. Second word, 13, 20, 20, 6, 23, 2, 1, 15. Third word, 13, 15. Fourth and last word, 17, 9, 6, 23, 14, 2. That's all, and that was another secret message in Annie's Mystery Radio Code. And all you 1936 members who have your super decoder pins and secret books can figure it out right away. Just set your super decoder at A13, the way I told you before I read the message. And it'll figure the whole thing out for you automatically and say,
Isn't that
you haven't
neat?
sent in...
And the rest comes about Ovaltine. Thought you'd like that segment. There actually was a secret society with secret codes at the end of Little Orphan Annie. Going into comedy, Jack Benny was probably the most iconic comedian to be in the golden age of radio. Benny was very different if you listen to him at the early part of his career to where the show evolved to. Kind of like this channel in a lot of ways, I guess. Here's the first Jack Benny program that was broadcast on old time radio. Now listen for the audience. See if you can hear a studio audience in this.
Tonight, Canada Dry, the campaign of ginger ales, presents a series of programs to advertise the new made-to-order Canada Dry, which you can now buy by the glass at drugstores and soda fountains. This series will feature George Orsen and his music, Miss Ethel Chute, the star of many Broadway successes, and that suave comedian, dry humorist, and famous master of ceremonies, Jack Benny.
Thank you, Mr. Thorgerson. That's pretty good from a man who doesn't even know me. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jack Benny talking and making my first appearance on the air professionally. By that I mean I'm finally getting paid, which of course will be a great relief to my creditors. I really don't know why I'm here. I'm supposed to be a sort of a master of ceremonies and tell you all the things that will happen, which would happen anyway. I must introduce the different artists who could easily introduce themselves, and also talk about the Canada Dry made to order by the glass, which is a waste of time, as you know all about it. You drink it, like it, and don't want to hear about it. So, ladies and gentlemen, a master of ceremonies is really a fellow who is unemployed and gets paid for it. I think you will like the entertainment arranged for tonight, I hope. Of course, I haven't seen any of the program myself, but I've spoken to the artists individually. They seem to think it's awfully good.
Yeah, Jack Benny, in his innumerable dry humor, also known to be a cheapskate. That was Jack Benny's thing. Jack Benny actually began in radio in March 1932, believe it or not. He appeared on the Ed Sullivan radio show on NBC. He was then given his own show later in 32 as Canada Dry Ginger Ale being his sponsor. Then the show went to CBS, actually. It was started on the NBC Blue Network May 2nd, 1932, which you just heard that the beginning of that episode of. And then it moved after 6 months to CBS. He didn't want to be on the NBC Blue Network. The Blue Network was for shows they were starting out to see if they would be good enough to go to the Red Network. Benny wanted to be on CBS. Let's go to the moment of showing you a little backstory about old-time radio dramas. They were typically recorded in live theaters. A lot of people may not know that. These were live performances. And most of the reason why this was done was because they didn't have super good high-fidelity recording equipment back in the early days. So what they did was they would put them on the acetane discs like I showed you in the beginning of this, and they would have them at a live theater. That's how old-time radio was done. Jack Benny was very popular on CBS. Listen to the difference now with a live studio audience being at Jack Benny here for the second cut of Jack Benny, now on CBS, and not sponsored by Canada Dry Ginger Ale anymore. He's sponsored by a cigarette company.
The Jack Benny Program. Starring Jack Benny with Mary Livingston, Phil Harris, Rochester, Larry Stevens, and yours truly, Don Wilson. Ladies and gentlemen, next Sunday night we will be broadcasting from New York City. So let's go to Jack's house in Beverly Hills, where he's busy preparing for the trip.
East side, west side, all around the town. I wonder if the little flowers' leaves are turning brown. La 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 la. Sweet Georgia Brown.
Oh, boy, New York. Bright lights, Broadway. So much excitement in New York. Subways, taxicabs, people rushing around. That's where you see all the old vaudeville acts. Powers, Elephant, Sharky the Trained Field, Fink's Mule, Fred Allen. Let's see now. I'll cash a check when I get to New York, but I'll need some money on the train. Better figure out how much I'll need. See, there'll be 9 meals in the diner at 50 cents a meal. That's $4.50. Maybe I should get Rochester to pack some sandwiches. Nah, how often do you go to New York? Besides, you get jelly all over the berth.
From left to right in this photo, from where they're standing, Rochester first, he's the smallest there. Mary Livingston, who was Jack's friend there, is in the middle, of course, and Jack Benny on the other side. So this threesome really changed radio, and what their talents created for radio dramas were so good, it actually went to television. And a really neat comment here from Andy in the UK. Jack Benny was famous for never giving his age away. It's true. He always said he was 39. Nice catch, Andy. Old-time radio, or the golden age of radio here in the States, also had some pretty scary shows on as well. Lights Out was one of those. It began in 1934, believe it or not. This was read by a man named Arch Oboler, but it was created by a man named Willis Cooper. Versions of the Lights Out shows aired on different networks at various times from January 3rd of 1934 all the way to the summer of 1947, and the series eventually made the transition to television. Lights Out was one of the earliest radio horror programs, actually predating popular shows Suspense and Inner Sanctum. Let's take a listen to show number 1 of Lights Out.
Ironized Yeast presents Lights Out. Everybody.
It is later than you think.
Lights Out brings you stories of the supernatural and the supernormal, dramatizing the fantasies and the mysteries of the unknown. We tell you this frankly, so if you wish to avoid the excitement and tension of these imaginative plays, we urge you, calmly but sincerely, to turn off your radio now.
My name, Arch Oboler. Tonight, another in our series of tales of the weird and the unusual. I plead with all mothers-in-law who listen to tonight's story not to send me poison pen letters. Fact of the matter is, I like mothers-in-law. I'm really not responsible for what happens in the twisted brains of my characters, am I? But first, before we start, Frank Martin has a word for you.
And now, lights out. Everybody.
Imagine starting out with that, and it's dark outside, and you're a kid. Theater of the Mind, radio was so powerful back in the golden age of radio. That was way back. I made the mistake saying it was the first episode. That actually was a later episode. But still, the power of what that show was about was pretty cool to listen to. Most radio dramas back in the early days, the golden age of radio, were broadcast from New York City or Chicago. Both were hubs for people to create these wonderful programs that became the golden age of radio. But then a third city became a little core for some very popular stations, shows in old-time radio, WXYZ. Now, WXYZ was in Detroit, Michigan, and they created some amazing content for what would be considered a smaller town, to be honest, including The Lone Ranger. The Lone Ranger was one of the first shows that came out on WXYZ. It was broadcast from there in 1933. Brace Beamer played the role of the Lone Ranger from 1941 to 54. This is actually episode number 1 on WXYZ. Listen carefully and you'll hear them say the first in a series.
A fiery horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a hearty hi-yo silver, the Lone Ranger. This is the story that tells how Tonto once saved the Lone Ranger. The Lone Ranger and Tonto were riding westward across desolate country. They were looking at the tracks of a wagon train when suddenly a thin young man stepped from behind a big boulder. He held a rifle to his shoulder and shouted,
Right in or I'll shoot. That's it. Now get off those horses and don't try to reach for a gun.
The Lone Ranger and Tonto dismounted slowly.
Easy, steady, big fellow.
Easy.
Then the masked man dropped his hand with lightning speed and fired from the hip. His bullet smashed the rifle and sent it flying from the young man's hands.
Now raise your hands. Search him, Tonto. See if he has any other weapons.
I haven't. I should have known better than to try to hold up a masked outlaw.
I'm not an outlaw, and you don't look like one.
I'm not. I held you up because I hoped to find food in your saddlebags.
What's your name?
Wingate. Dave Wingate.
What are you doing alone in country like this?
I was with a wagon train. It passed here.
Why did you leave the train?
I was driven away.
Why?
I didn't do anything wrong. I was framed by Cap Sanders.
Cap Sanders?
He was hired.
The Lone Ranger, first show there from WXYZ in Detroit, Michigan. They also produced another show that's very popular we'll have in just a moment. But before we get there, we've got to start here. This was a very famous pair in radio, Fibber, McGee, and Molly. It ran on NBC from 1935 to 1959, then switched to television in 1959. Its running gags and characters inspired many imitators. Fibber, McGee, and Molly was the finest husband and wife comedy team. It ran on radio from 1935 to 1959 and then moved on to television. Here is their first episode from back in the day, and this would date this show back to 1935.
Auto Wax present a new show featuring Rico Marcelli's orchestra, Kathleen Wells, those two harmoniacs, Ronnie and Van, and starring that ambulating Ananias, that humbug of the highways, That's meretricious motorist Fibber McGee with his constant companion and severest critic, Molly. Well, what are you doing, Fibber? Will you stop rattling that script in this microphone?
This ain't a script. It's a road map.
A road map?
Yeah. You see, this here map shows Route 42 and Route 16. Molly wants us to take Route 42, but I claim that 16 is more smoother, more straighter, more faster, more...
Fibber McGee, come back here.
I guess you take 42.
Fibber McGee and Molly, an incredibly successful and very, very popular husband-wife team. Good show from back in the day. We just talked a real short time ago about WXYZ in Detroit. Most of Hollywood and everybody west was cut out at this point. In the 30s, old-time radio dramas were done in New York, Chicago, but then in Detroit as well. The next one in order of date release would be from WXYZ. Then this one is a totally different thing than what they released in terms of when we talked first a moment ago about the Lone Ranger. This was the next show they produced. The next show they produced was a show called The Green Hornet. And this was kind of a really special, kind of a sci-fi investigator, kind of, tough guy, takes on crime. Kind of weird, but interesting. You'll hear a long orchestral open to this, but it was like this in WXYZ shows because they wanted to emphasize the crispness of the orchestra. Here's actually the Green Hornet, show number 1.
The Green Hornet. He hunts the biggest of all game, public enemies that even the G-men cannot reach. The Green Hornet.
See how they really emphasize the orchestral work here at the beginning of the Green Hornet. Let's get to the part where we actually have a little bit of a show. This again, Green Hornet, show number 1 from WXYZ Detroit.
Reveal, and you'll have your scoop. If.
What's the if, Conway?
If you let me have everything in your possession pertaining to the Green Hornet.
What?
The Green Hornet.
But, Conway, what makes you think the Daily Sentinel has anything about him?
Perhaps you haven't. In that case, I'll get the worst of the bargain. On the other hand, perhaps you have. I'll have to rely entirely on your word of honor.
I see.
I'll promise you a scoop on my expose when I'm ready to break it, provided you give me your word of honor to tell me all you know about the Green Hornet.
Well, my word of honor.
Precisely.
Let me think this proposition over, Conway.
What? Think it over? Then you do know more about it than the police have announced.
I'm not committing myself just yet. Oh, by the way, I must send a radiogram to the paper to have my valet meet me at the field.
Well, that won't be necessary. My daughter Polly will be there.
Oh, but I don't want...
She'll have her car to meet me. We can drop you any place you say.
Well, if it won't put you out, you can drop me by...
What you don't know is the guy that was talking, saying that he had to give up information on the Green Hornet, was actually the Green Hornet. That's why there was a little bit of a pause there, pregnant pause. That was fun. Green Hornet and WXYZ Detroit doing both the Green Hornet and the Lone Ranger. Rodney in Holland, I'll put this up. Kimosabe means idiot in Apache. It really does. That's a true story. There's stories of the Lone Ranger and Tonto, unfortunately, fighting up in heaven over all of the times he was called Kimosabe. There was a man also in radio who became so popular named Milton Burle. He started with the Texaco Star Theater, and it was broadcast on radio from 1938 to 1949, and then on television from 1948 to 1956. It was one of the first successful examples of American television broadcasting, remembered as the show that gave Milton Burle the nickname Mr. Television. Other folks called him Uncle Milty. But here is Milton Burle and the sound of his show in the golden age of radio.
If every smoker knew what Philip Morris smokers know, they'd all change to Philip Morris. Johnny presents the Milton Burle Show. Here comes Johnny, ladies and gentlemen. Johnny on the spot for Philip Morris, America's finest cigarette. If every smoker knew what Philip Morris smokers know, they'd all change to Philip Morris. Yes.
Isn't that something? Yeah, a kid as a newspaper, newspaper seller saying Philip Morris cigarettes, not so good. Let's get to a little bit of Milton Burle at his best.
Miss me. I keep telling him to search the ushers. That's the way I like to start a program, with whimsical comedy. Nothing hokey. Well, Mr. Gallup, the big radio season is about to start, and soon all the comedians will be back.
Burle, do you mean there were no comedians on the air all summer?
Well, I was on all summer.
You haven't answered my question.
Mr. Gallup, I'm serious. Tonight we're welcoming back to the air my colleagues in comedy.
You mean they're going to do to the people all winter what you did to them all summer?
Yes.
Psychiatry's in for a big year.
Psychiatry, Mr. Gallup, you've been...
Milton Burle talking about comedy, and there were seasons in radio just like there are seasons in television. They're exactly the same now as they were in radio back in the day. In fact, that's how networks learned how to put shows into seasons, was back from the golden age of radio. We need to tell this story. If we're going to tell the story of the golden age of radio, there's no way we can't tell this story. Orson Welles. On Halloween morning of 1938, Orson Welles awoke to find himself the most talked about man in America. The night before, Welles and his Mercury Theater on the Air had performed a radio adaptation of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, converting the 40-year-old novel into fake news bulletins describing a Martian invasion of New Jersey. Some listeners, unfortunately, mistook those bulletins for the real thing, and their anxious phone calls to police, newspaper offices, and radio stations convinced many journalists that the show had caused nationwide hysteria. By the next morning, the 23-year-old Welles' face and name were on the front pages of newspapers from coast to coast, along with headlines about the mass panic his CBS broadcast had allegedly inspired. Welles barely had time to glance at the papers, leaving him with only a horribly vague sense of what he had really done to the country. He had heard reports of mass stampedes, of suicides, and of angered listeners threatening to shoot him on sight. If I'd planned to wreck my career, he told several people at the time, I couldn't have gone about it any better. With his livelihood and possibly even his freedom on the line, Welles went before dozens of reporters, photographers, and newsreel cameramen of the day in a hastily arranged press conference in the CBS building. Each journalist asked him some variation of some basic question, which was, had he intended, or did he at all anticipate, that War of the Worlds would throw its audience into panic? That question would follow Welles the rest of his life, and his answers changed as the years went on, from protestations of innocence to playful hints that he knew exactly what he was doing all along. Let's take a listen to that very famous broadcast from October 30th of 1938, Orson Welles' War of the Worlds.
The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. gentlemen, the director of the Mercury Theater and star of these broadcasts, Orson Welles.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. We know now that as human beings busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space. Yet across an immense ethereal gulf, minds that are to our minds as ours are to the beasts in the jungle, intellects, vast, cool, and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. In the 39th year of the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment. It was near the end of October. Business was better. The war scare was over. More men were back at work. Sales were picking up. On this particular evening, October 30th, the Crosby service estimated that 32 million people were listening in on radios.
For the next 24 hours, not much change in temperature. A slight atmospheric disturbance of undetermined origin is reported over Nova Scotia, causing a low-pressure area to move down rather rapidly over the northeastern states, bringing a forecast of rain accompanied by winds of light gale force. Maximum temperature 66, minimum 48. This weather report comes to you from the Government Weather Bureau. We take you now to the Meridian Room in the Hotel Park Plaza in downtown New York, where you will be entertained by the music of Raymond Raquello and his orchestra.
Okay, I'm going to let this sink in for a moment. This is, if people came in a little late, missed just that little short beginning, this is what they would have heard. Sounds like regular broadcast, right? Listen to this.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. From the Meridian Room in the Park Plaza Hotel in New York City, we bring you the music of Raymond Raquello and his orchestra. With a touch of the Spanish, Raymond Raquello leads off with La Comparsita.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The spectroscope indicates the gas to be hydrogen and moving toward the Earth with enormous velocity. Professor Pearson of the observatory at Princeton confirms Farrell's observation and describes the phenomenon as, quote, like a jet of blue flame shot from a gun, unquote. We now return you to the music of Raymond Raquello, playing for you in the Meridian Room of the Park Plaza Hotel, situated in downtown New York.
And now a tune that never loses favor, the ever-popular Stardust, Raymond Raquello and his orchestra.
Ladies and gentlemen, following on the news given in our bulletin a moment ago, the Government Meteorological Bureau has requested the large observatories of the country to keep an astronomical watch on any further disturbances occurring on the planet Mars. Due to the unusual nature of this occurrence, we have arranged an interview with the noted astronomer, Professor Pearson, who will give us his views on this event. In a few moments, we will take you to the Princeton Observatory at Princeton, New Jersey. We return you until then to the music of Ramon Raquello and his orchestra.
You can see how absolutely real that would sound unless you heard the beginning of it. And that's how they pulled it off. War of the Worlds was a radio blockbuster, and it was so resonating within this country, at least the United States, that it really helped to propel Orson Welles to stratospheric star status. And he could get the best of Hollywood stars to come and appear on his famous Mercury Theater. One of those was Lionel Barrymore. You might remember Barrymore from the movie It's a Wonderful Life. He plays Mr. Potter in that movie. He actually played Scrooge in A Christmas Carol for the Campbell's Playhouse Mercury Theater for Orson Welles for 4 years. He was able to get great stars at the top of their game like Lionel Barrymore. And it all really came because of War of the Worlds. The great Orson Welles doing some, I think, of the most amazing work in the golden age of radio that really helped to form a historical background of, wow, radio is really cool and very powerful, too, as a medium here in the States. There was another little duo that was really important, and you'll love this. This is really cool. It's a very famous bit, and I know most people have heard it, but this is very special. Abbott and Costello, who started on NBC Blue and went to ABC once NBC Blue was split off to ABC, were a phenomenal comedy team, but they were a bit risque at times, so they stayed on NBC Blue. There was a very famous episode where they did a show, a little bit called Who's On First. That actually began on radio. The first time it was done was on the Kate Smith Show. Now, that show actually was done on July 3rd, about 1940, unfortunately, but March 24th, excuse me. That show was on Kate Smith's radio show, March 24th of 1938. As of this show, no surviving copy of that broadcast is known to exist. Abbott and Costello's first rendering of Who's On First was a stunning hit, so much, though, that after their first on-air performance of it, they were quickly rebooked for a return engagement on The Smith Show in October of that same year, and they would play it from time to time on their own show, which was kind of interesting. Abbott and Costello would go on to star in nearly 40 films, including the classic Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, star in their own radio and own TV series, and the team would forever be associated, though, with Who's On First. They would go on to reperform the baseball skit, sometimes with subtle variations throughout their career. Here's one of the most famously known comedy bits from the golden age of radio. It's from the Abbott and Costello Show from 1948.
Well, Costello, I'm going to New York with you. You know, Bucky Harris, the Yanks manager, gave me a job as coach for as long as you're on the team.
Look, Abbott, if you're the coach, you must know all the players.
I certainly do.
Well, you know, I never met the guys, so you'll have to tell me their names, and then I'll know who's playing on the team.
Oh, I'll tell you their names, but you know, strange it may seem, they give these ball players nowadays very peculiar names.
You mean funny names?
Strange names, pet names, like Dizzy Dean and...
His brother Daffy?
Daffy Dean.
I'm their French cousin.
French?
Gouffet.
Gouffet Dean, oh, I see. Well, let's see, we have on the bags, we have who's on first, what's on second, I don't know who's on third.
That's what I want to find out.
I say, who's on first, what's on second, I don't know who's on third.
Are you the manager?
Yes.
You're going to be the coach, too?
Yes.
And you know the fellow's name?
Well, I should.
Well, then who's on first?
Yes.
I mean the fellow's name.
Who?
The guy on first.
Who?
The first baseman.
Who?
The guy playing
Who
first.
is on first?
I'm asking you who's on first.
That's the man's name.
That's whose name?
Yes.
Well, go ahead and tell me.
That's it.
That's who?
Yes.
Look, you got a first baseman.
Certainly.
Who's playing first?
That's right.
When you pay off the first baseman every month, who gets the money?
Every dollar of it.
All I'm trying to find out is the fellow's name on first base.
Who?
The guy that gets the money.
That's it.
Who gets the money on first
He does, every dollar. Sometimes his wife comes down and collects it.
Whose wife?
Yes. What's wrong with that?
Look, all I want to know is when you sign up the first baseman, how does he sign his name to the
Who?
contract? The guy.
Who?
How does he sign his
That's
name?
how he signs it.
Who?
Yes.
All I'm trying to find out is what's the guy's name on first base.
No, what is on second base?
I'm not asking you who's on second.
Who's on first?
One base at a time.
Well, don't change the players.
I'm not changing nobody.
Take it easy, buddy.
I'm only asking you, who's the guy on first base?
That's right.
Okay.
All right.
I mean, what's the guy guy's name on first base?
No, what is on second?
I'm not asking you who's on second.
Who's on first?
I don't know.
Oh, he's on third. We're not talking about him. Now, let's forget it.
Now, how did I get on third base?
Why, you mentioned his name.
If I mention a third baseman's name, who did I say is playing third?
No, who's playing first?
What's on first?
What's on second?
I don't know.
He's on third.
There I go, back on third again. Will you stay on third base and don't go off it?
All right, now what do you want to know?
Now, who's playing third base?
Why do you insist on putting who on third base?
What am I putting on third?
What is on second?
You don't want who on second?
Who is on first?
I don't know. Third base. Look, you got outfield?
Sure.
The left fielder's name.
Why?
I just thought I'd ask.
Well, I just thought I'd tell you.
Then tell me who's playing left field.
Who is playing first?
I'm not. Stay out of the infield. I want to know what's the guy's name in left field.
No, what is on second?
I'm not asking you who's on second.
Who's on first?
I don't know. Third base. And the left fielder's name?
Why?
Because.
Oh, he's center field.
Look. You got a pitcher on the team?
Sure.
The pitcher's name?
Tomorrow.
You don't want to tell me today?
I'm telling you,
then
man.
Go ahead.
Tomorrow.
What time?
What time what?
What time tomorrow you're going to tell me who's pitching?
Now listen, who is not pitching?
I'll break your arm, you say. Who's on first? I want to know what's the pitcher's name.
What's on second?
I don't know.
Third base.
Now the catcher?
Certainly.
The catcher's name?
Today.
And tomorrow's pitcher?
Now you've got it.
All we got is a couple of days on the team. You know, I'm a catcher, too.
So they tell me.
I get behind the plate, do some fancy catching. Tomorrow's pitching on my team, and a heavy hitter gets up.
Yes.
Now, the heavy hitter bunts the ball. When he bunts the ball, me being a good catcher, I'm going to throw the guy out of first base, so I pick up the ball and throw it to who?
Now, that's the first thing you've said right.
I don't even know what I'm talking about.
Well, that's all you have to do.
Is to throw the ball to first base.
Yes.
Now, who's got it?
Naturally.
Look, if I throw the ball to first base, somebody's got to get it. Now, who has it?
Naturally.
Who?
Naturally.
Naturally?
Naturally.
So I pick up the ball and I throw it to Natural.
No, you don't. You throw the ball to who?
Naturally.
That's different.
That's what I said.
You're not saying that.
I throw the ball to Naturally.
You throw it to who?
Naturally.
That's it.
That's what I said.
Listen, you asked me.
I throw the ball to who?
Naturally.
Now you asked me.
You throw the ball to who?
Naturally.
That's it.
Same as you.
Don't change them around.
Same as you.
Now get it over.
I throw the ball to who? Whoever it is drops the ball and the guy runs a second.
Yes.
Who picks up the ball and throws it to what? What throws it to? I don't know. Throws it back to tomorrow. Triple play.
Yes.
Another guy gets up and it's a long fly ball to because. Why? I don't know. He's on third and I don't give a darn.
What?
I said I don't give a darn.
Oh, that's our shortstop.
I mean,
The impeccable Lou and Bud. Abbott and Costello, amazing comedy team. And I like what Greg said. They do amazing timing. To do that bit that well with such great timing took so much work. Incredible. The talents of Abbott and Costello. That was fun to share. Inner Sanctum Mysteries was one of those shows that came on at night as well, like Suspense, and Lights Out. Anyways, Inner Sanctum, also known as Inner Sanctum Mysteries, is a popular old-time radio drama that aired from January 7th, 1941 to October 5th of 1952. It was created by producer Hyman Brown and based on the imprint given to the mystery novels of Simon & Schuster. In all, there were 526 episodes broadcast. Here is the great show Inner Sanctum Mysteries. Hope you like it.
Hello. Oh, there you are. I was afraid for a moment that you had forgotten our appointment. Why, you almost scared me to death. And that won't do after all the pains I've taken to scare you. You remember me, don't you? I'm your host on behalf of the makers of Carter's Pills. And you're to be my guest tonight in the mysterious circle of the inner sanctum. Come in, friends, won't you? Thank you. Take that chair by the fire. Good. And you'll become accustomed to the dim lights in a moment. Don't get too comfortable, because we'll have you out of that chair with thrills and chills, shivers and quivers. You're on our side, aren't you? You'd better be. But don't worry.
Instead of the arch criminals haunting us, we're going to haunt them. We're going to scare the daylights out of them. Yes. Welcome, then, friends. Welcome to the mysterious circle of the inner sanctum. And listen to as weird and strange a tale as ever was told. The amazing death of Mrs. Putnam.
And the organ would play just like that. Inner Sanctum Mysteries would play for quite a long time, actually, on radio, all the way from 1941 to 1952. Another show that was similar to that was the show Suspense. And Suspense is an interesting show, to be honest. It was broadcast on CBS radio from 1940 all the way through 1962. Now, remember that second date, 1962. One of the premier drama programs of the golden age of radio was subtitled Radio's Outstanding Theater of Thrills and focused on suspense thriller-type scripts, usually featuring leading Hollywood actors of the era. Let's take a listen. This will be Suspense show number 1, way back from the year 1940.
The Columbia Network takes pleasure in bringing you Suspense. Suspense. Stories from the world's great literature of pure excitement. A new series frankly dedicated to your horrification and entertainment. Week by week, from the pick of new material, from the pages of best-selling novels, from the theater of Broadway and London, and the sound stages of Hollywood, will parade the most remarkable figures ever known. CBS gives you Suspense. Tonight's presentation is one of the finest of the contemporary stories of mystery and terror. John Dickson Carr's famous novel, The Burning Court.
A glass of sherry by the fireside of a beautiful suburban home. What could be more comforting? You're an admirable host, Mr. Depart, and it's really a shame our first meeting is under such a cloud. It's also a shame I have so little time to tell you which one of your guests here murdered your uncle last week.
And the music would come up, right? Because it was a big moment. That was very special. Suspense, big show. And like I said, remember that last date, 1962. Another show, then someone mentioned this earlier in the comments about The Shadow. The Shadow Knows, right? That show actually aired on the Mutual Network. First time, September 26th of 1937. It ended December 26th, 1954. There were 677 episodes that aired over the 18 seasons, including an additional summer series in its final season. Here is The Shadow, show number 1, all the way back from 1937.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows.
Blue Coal presents The Shadow, a man of mystery who strikes terror in the very souls of sharpsters, lawbreakers, and criminals. All signs point to a severe winter. Be prepared. If you want to be sure of even, dependable, healthful heat in any kind of weather, insist on Blue Coal, America's finest anthracite mined from the fields of northern Pennsylvania. The coal that is colored a harmless blue at the mine for your protection.
You can't have me to the guy. You can't
out of here. Let me...
Oh, Gordon, listen.
Yeah? I can't see anybody. Who's that?
I am the Shadow. Stop. We haven't much time. We must hurry, Gordon. You're in the death house, charged with murder.
Yes, I'm innocent. I'm innocent. But nobody knows it.
Take courage, Gordon. The Shadow knows.
That was The Shadow. Great show. And, you know what was cool was it ended the day after Christmas, known as Boxing Day up in Canada in the UK, December 26th, 1954. 677 episodes of that drama. It's so good. Another one that came out right about the same time, believe it or not, they were really into these kind of scary shows in a period right in the early to mid-40s. The Whistler is an American radio mystery drama which ran from May 16th of 1942 until September 22nd of 1955. On the West Coast regional CBS radio networks where it first started, then it branched out to the rest of the country as it gained popularity. It's a great show, it really is. The show was broadcast in Chicago and over Armed Forces Radio as well. Here is a little bit of The Whistler from CBS.
Wait a minute. Have you heard The Whistler? I'm The Whistler.
No. Don't come near me. I didn't plan to kill you, no.
That was John Hendricks. He waited for a chance to sell his soul to the devil.
Money is not enough, John. Money is not enough. We want you, John. We want you.
That was his wife, Martha, the former widow Mazda.
Yes, Mother. Yes.
And her simple-minded son, Henry.
Go ahead, son. Go ahead. We must have John Hendricks. Yes, Mother. Yes, Mother.
And that was the famous part about radio dramas. They could play the music to really get you to jump a little bit. That was The Whistler, which is probably the most tame of a lot of the radio mysteries in the golden age of radio. And it was featured on CBS Radio, which was a big network for some of the best in radio dramas. The Whistler was one of the other ones. And, you know, one other show that we haven't talked about yet, which will have a scary movie star as its host, the great late Vincent Price. He had a radio drama that was called The Saint. The Saint, starring Vincent Price, began its life on radio in January of 1945. Most old-time radio reference books list the initial broadcast date as January 6th of 1945, probably because that was when the program aired in the eastern United States. Interestingly enough, Vincent Price hosted and starred in his own BBC radio drama, there's your BBC reference, which was broadcast in 1973, 1975, and 1983. Here's Vincent Price with a little bit of The Saint.
The Adventures of the Saint, starring Vincent Price. The Saint, based on characters created by Leslie Charteris and known to millions from books, magazines, and motion pictures. The Robin Hood of modern crime is now transcribed for radio, starring Hollywood's brilliant and talented actor Vincent Price as the Saint.
Anything wrong, Captain?
Nothing serious, Mr. Templar. Just coming down here for a check. Go on just as soon as we can.
Oh, and where is here?
Headstone, New Mexico. Used to be a big silver mining town, but now it's just another little town, I guess. Although I did notice there's a carnival playing over on the edge of this emergency landing strip.
Well, how long are we to enjoy the hospitality of Headstone?
Oh, 2 or 3 hours. Long enough to see the town, have dinner if you like. We're sorry to delay you, sir.
Oh, it's all right, Captain. I'm seldom bored in a strange town.
Well, you better go back and fasten your seatbelt, Mr. Templar. We're coming down now.
The Saint. That was a good one. That was on radio from from Mutual, I believe it was. That was from 1945. Neat show. And it's cool that he went to BBC, too, to continue bringing old-time radio dramas all the way to England. I like that part of that story for sure. We're right now at the part. 1945 is just getting into the beginning of television. And as maybe you don't know, that was what killed the golden age of radio, TV. Well, there was a lot of actors. There were tons of them who played various roles in different kinds of radio dramas back in the day. And these guys became
again, you bet you.
These guys became their own actors in radio and then also on television. They made the great transition from that. Let me show you one right here. This is a guy that maybe if you think of a cartoon character, you may be able to pick him up, but you'll recognize the voice. Here he is on the Eddie Cantor show. See if you can pick out the voice of the network executive.
Well, here I am, Mr. Bristol. Yes, Mr. Cantor, I sent for you. Well, stop fidgeting and sit down. Thank you, sir. Not on my lap. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. Now, what about next season? Well, Mr. Cantor, we like you, but we've decided you get too much money. Yeah, but Mr. Bristol, I don't get the money. My cast gets it. For instance, I pay Nora Martin $1,500 a week. He's worth it. And I pay Bonzel $2,000 a week. He's worth it. And that leaves me with nothing. You're worth it.
That was the great Alan Reed, who also played the voice of Fred Flintstone on the Flintstones. The television medium was introduced to Americans in 1939 and began to get a foothold after World War II. As in the 50s, the sale of TV sets and the boom in programming made TV America's favorite source of entertainment. Consider the numbers. In 1946, 7,000 TV sets were sold. In 1948, 172,000 sets were sold. And in 1950, 5 million sets were sold. Just under 20% of American homes contained a TV set by 1950. By 1960, nearly 90% of homes contained a television, and some even had color TVs. The number of TV stations, channels, and programs all grew to meet the surging demand. The 1950s truly was the decade for television, and many of these radio stars would make the transition from radio to TV. One of them had his own radio show before he became a star on television. The great Alan Young had his own show, began on NBC Radio as a summer replacement situation comedy back in 1944, featuring vocalist B. Wayne. It then moved to ABC Radio with Gene Gillespie portraying Young's girlfriend Betty. The program was next broadcast by NBC for a 1946-1947 run and was finally off in 1948. Here's a little snippet of the old Alan Young show.
Here we go again, you bet you.
Yes, here we go again. It's Alan Young, very deep in trouble. And as usual, we gotta dig him out. Listen to that young man who tries to be helpful and always needs help himself, Alan Young.
All right, so that face may be familiar to some people, might not be, but here's who he was on television. He was Wilbur, Mr. Ed, the only human Mr. Ed would speak to, the great Alan Young. That was the way it worked. Great television transition for Alan Young. Another show, which was so good and it launched this gentleman's career for the next 40 years. No kidding. Let me show you a picture of him. You'll know right away who this is. This is a very young Jack Webb. Dragnet is another radio drama that made its way to TV. Dragnet, the radio series, premiered on NBC on June 3rd, 1949, and ended on February 26th of 1947. A set of 314 original episodes aired between June of 49 and September of 1955, with 22 Rifle for Christmas and The Big Little Jesus usually rerun during Christmas time. Reruns were broadcast from the end of September 1955 until February of 1957. On television, Dragnet ran for 4 seasons from January 12th of 1967 all the way to April 16th of 1970. But Jack Webb did more than that. He also produced a couple of other shows through his Mark 7 production group. Adam 12. Adam 12 was one of the shows that Jack Webb helped to introduce to television through his Mark 5 Limited. Also, then, and by the way, Adam 12 was on NBC for quite a while, actually. It was on there for 175 episodes, believe it or not. Then the show Emergency, which followed Adam 12, was on until May 28th of 1977. So the great Jack Webb, who began in radio as an early star for Dragnet, began back in 1949, went all the way to 1977 in the entertainment field. Let's take a brief listen to Jack Webb doing a great show of Dragnet, and this is its initial show. Excuse the audio, it's a little bit bad, but it is the first show of Dragnet on radio.
The story you are about to hear is true. Only the names have been changed to protect the innocent.
Dragnet. Dragnet, the documented drama of an actual crime, investigated and solved by the men who unrelentingly stand watch on the security of your home, your family, and your life. For the next 30 minutes, in cooperation with the Los Angeles Police Department, you will travel step by step on the side of the law through an actual case from official police files, from beginning to end, from crime to punishment. This is the story of your police force in action. Dragnet.
It was Tuesday, March 25th. It was cold in Los Angeles. We were working the night watch out of homicide. Detectives in Los Angeles work in pairs. My partner's Ben Romero. He's a sergeant, so am I. My name's Friday. The boss is Ed Backstrand, chief of detectives. I was on the way back from the record bureau, and it was 13 minutes past 11 when I got to room 42. Homicide.
That's a hot shot. Somebody grab it.
I got it, Ed.
At 1245 East Doheny Street, 2 officers shot. At 1245 East Doheny Street, 2 officers
shot.
What have you got, Friday?
Read it.
2 officers shot. Where's Romero?
Right here, Skipper.
Okay, you've got one to roll on. Get going.
The Great Dragnet, that's episode 1 with Jack Webb, that would start a career that many would say was extremely successful, not only in radio, but also the transition to television as well. There was another show that was on radio as we get towards the end of the golden age of radio, and that was a show that converted as well to television, even knocked one of my favorite shows as a kid off the air for a 4th season, but in the end, I guess it was worth it. There was a show on CBS that began back in 1952, so it's late to the party when you think of it as the golden age of radio. Gunsmoke, another radio show that went to television, set in Dodge City, Kansas in the 1890s. It began as a radio program, again on CBS, from 1952 to 1961. Like the radio version, the television series centered on the character of Matt Dillon, who was on TV, played by a different character than this. It was James Arness, 6'7" James Arness, who played on television a U.S. Marshal charged with maintaining law and order in an American frontier town called Dodge City, Kansas. On TV, it was a show that helped to cancel Gilligan's Island's 4th season on CBS. The CBS executives knew that they had a winner in Gunsmoke, and it ran on CBS for 20 seasons in television, 1955 to 1975, with, of course, the legendary James Arness as Matt Dillon. But on radio, it was a different Matt Dillon. He's the one here pictured on the left. That is, if you don't know the person's name on that, that would be William Conrad as Matt Dillon. Let's take a listen to Gunsmoke from back in the 1950s. In the golden age of radios, it's just starting to get a little bit towards the end of this legendary time in radio.
Around Dodge City, into the territory on West, there's just one way to handle the killers and the spoilers, and that's with a U.S. Marshal and the smell of gun smoke.
Gunsmoke, the story of the violence that moved west with young America. The story of a man who moved with it. Matt Dillon, United States Marshal.
Wanted for murder.
Wanted for murder.
Clay Richards.
Clay Richards.
Age 31.
31.
Height 6 feet. Eyes brown. Hair red.
Eyes brown, hair red. Hey, how'd you like me to print his picture on these notices? I got a woodcut. Well, let me show you. Ernie!
Yep?
Fetch your marshal a copy of that front page. Interviewing Clay's wife yesterday, I noticed a tintype on the mantel, their wedding photograph. So, first thing you know, I snitched it.
It's very thoughtful.
Yeah, I'll take it, Ernie.
Here.
And then I propped it up in front of me and carved me this woodcut. Ain't she prime? Ain't she just elegant?
Real elegant.
Good likeness, don't you think? Of course, he was 7 or 8 years younger with the tintype.
Yeah, it's a good
That's
likeness.
his hair shorter.
Doesn't show what makes a law-abiding man like him try to rob a bank. Doesn't look like a man who murdered an old cashier and a Chinese cook who just happened to be
Sure sweated
there.
over it, though.
But it's a good likeness.
Yes, sir, it is. A picture like this sure dresses up the front page, don't it?
Yeah, it's a little masterpiece, Mr. Hightower, a notable contribution to the culture of Dodge City.
Well, thank you, Marshal. Does fetch the eye, don't it? I'm printing an extra 500 copies of the weekly, and I bet I sell them all. Too bad the cashier's shot went wild. If he'd managed to kill Clay or even wing him, why, I bet I could sell 1,000 extra copies.
We must be thankful for the blessings we do receive, Mr. Hightower.
Oh, I am, Marshal, I am. Why, just before it happened yesterday afternoon, I didn't know what I was going to fill my columns with, and then, like manna from heaven, 2 murders and a bank robbery.
Attempted bank robbery, Mr. Hightower. He turned and ran before he got his hands on so much as $1.
Yes.
Still, as you say, like manna.
Dillon,
I'm talking business. What is it, Chester?
Well, it can wait, I guess, Mr. Dillon.
Yeah, print Clay's picture on those notices, Mr. Hightower. Oh, where were we?
Eyes brown, hair red.
Oh, yes. Also known as Red.
Gunsmoke, played by William Conrad on radio. And CBS executives felt that Conrad didn't have the look that they felt that Matt Dillon should have. Most of the rest of the characters came over from radio to television, but with a different Matt Dillon, who would be James Arness, and his imposing size of 6'7", and a very good-looking young man made the difference for the show. We're just about to the very end of the golden age of radio, and we're to my favorite show. And I've just got to be honest, this wasn't my favorite guy who played the role. Yours truly, Johnny Dollar, was aired on CBS Radio, and it was an extremely big drama. It really was. It was over 710 episodes in all. The date for this, by the way, September 30th, which was a Sunday night, 1962. The final 2 shows would end the golden age of radio here in the States. At 6 o'clock, listeners got to hear Mandel Kramer in front of the microphone as yours truly, Johnny Dollar. Now, I'm personally a Bob Bailey fan of the role, but Mandel Kramer played it quite well. The episode with the man with the action-packed expense account has been around since the end of the 1940s, believe it or not. Several actors have played Johnny Dollar through the years, and this last adventure was typical of the program's usual high quality. Johnny gets called into the bedside of a dying convict. Although it was Johnny's testimony that sent the convict up the river, he had always been a straight shooter. Besides, the loot from the convict's last job had never been recovered, and the insurance company was forced to pay off. The con lets Johnny in on the secret, a secret that will involve murder and nitroglycerin. The great Johnny Dollar, a show that I absolutely love from the golden age of radio. Here's Mandel Kramer, 6 o'clock, September 30th, 1962.
Because I doubt if Danny's going to waste much time getting down here. And if I'm not around when he does get here... Well, Burle?
Okay. What do you want me to do?
Got enough food around here to keep us for a couple of days?
Sure, I got plenty.
All right, then I'm moving in. Have you got a phone?
No. Only plenty of food and booze.
I can see that. Is there any other way to get here, Burle, besides the road that turns off near the gas station?
Not unless somebody try to get here with one of those helicopters.
All right, then from the gas station, I can tell if somebody is heading in here.
Huh?
I'll see you later. Item 4, back at the gas station, out on the highway, $100 even.
$100? Oh, for that, man, I'll ride a bicycle or borrow my sister's car, and you can keep the old crate.
No, Jimmy, I'll only need it for a day or two, I hope.
All the time you want. And is there anything else I can do, Mr. Dollar?
Just let me have a handful of change to throw at this payphone of yours. Item 5, $3.80 for a call to George Hardy at his home back in Hartford. I gave him the whole story.
Good, Johnny, good. I had a feeling it had to do with that safe-cracking job we had to make good on. Now, how do I contact you down there?
You don't. I'll have to contact you. What are you thinking of?
Well, you said this Danny Russelloff hasn't shown up there yet.
Not yet. Though he's had plenty of time by now.
Maybe Danny's playing it smart now he's on parole.
What do you mean?
Well, he's supposed to report in here in Hartford where he used to live, isn't he?
Probably.
So he'll do that first to give a good impression. Make everybody think he's on the up and up.
Good memories.
Maybe.
And then when he figures nobody's watching him anymore, then he'll make his move, right?
Except that I can't see him wasting any time about getting his hands on the money, or at least making sure it's still here. So, George.
Yes?
Get hold of Pete Larkin.
The private detective.
Yeah, tell him it's for me. Tell him if Danny is there in Hartford to keep an eye on him day and night. And if he leaves town, I want to know it so I can be ready for him.
Okay. And meanwhile, what'll you be doing? Have you called on the police down there?
I don't even know if they have any in this little town. What's more, a couple of cops prowling around would only scare him away, and I want to get him. I'll check back with you 3 or 4 times a day.
Okay. And at least we know where that 100,000 is now.
Do we? Maybe I better get back out to Burle and make sure.
Yours truly, Johnny Dollar. Started 6 p.m. on September 30th, 1962. The second to last show to air from the networks on the old-time radio dramas in the golden age of radio. The last show was a show that was very, very popular as well. Believe it or not, it was in its last show, and to make the final night, to think that yours truly, Johnny Dollar, which is my personal favorite, and this show would be paired together. It would be the final 2 network-produced shows from the golden age of radio. That show? Suspense. Suspense, in 1962, aired at 6:30 p.m. The show was called Devilstone. It was a wonderful show about a mansion, really almost a castle, which was called Devilstone. And a young man who is from Dublin has a chance to rent Devilstone to some new tenants. But after visiting the place, the couple is angered that he would send them to a haunted castle without warning. The young man decides to visit Devilstone, and of course he comes face to face with the specter himself. The final Suspense aired at 6:30 p.m. on September 30th, 1962. Here's the very end of that show and the final words ever in the golden age of radio.
Where all the bodies and...
Yes, quickly now. The flashlight, give it to me.
Here, sir.
Now, look down there on the earthen floor below. Do you see? The wrists are cut. He killed himself.
No, it's he. It's the ghost that we saw.
Yes, Abbott. The body of Jason O'Flynn. And so perfectly preserved as though he died only moments ago.
Oh, it's horrid.
Until his body turned to dust, he said.
So we know now that we've found it. So please, sir, let's leave this place.
Wait, Abbott. Wait. Do you see? Now the fresh air has reached it.
Oh, good Lord.
Yes. The color is leaving the cheeks. The pallor of death is taking its place. And yes, now, at long last, the body will turn to dust. No longer will Jason O'Flynn walk the night. Requiescat in pace.
Suspense. You've been listening to Devil's Stone, starring Christopher Carey and Neil Fitzgerald, and written especially for Suspense by Jonathan Bundy. Suspense is produced and directed by Fred Hendrickson. Heard in tonight's story were Gilbert Mack, Walter Grisey, Reynold Osborne, and Frank Milano. Music supervision by Ethel Huber. Sound patterns by Walter Otto. Technical direction by Fred Cusick. Associate Director Bernie Seabrooks. This is Stuart Metz speaking. Every weekday evening, Chris Schenkel is anchorman for a globe-girdling roundup of first-hand reports on sports activities everywhere. Make this your address for worldwide sports every weeknight. He who laughs oftenest hears Arthur Godfrey Time weekdays on the CBS Radio Network.
And that was it. The end of the golden age of radio, September 30th, 1962. The final episodes of yours truly, Johnny Dollar, and the classic Suspense series. Golden Age of Radio lasted for about 35 years in total. Tens of thousands of shows later, the Golden Age of Radio from U.S. radio networks may have been over. But even for the 60th anniversary of that happening, those two shows airing, which is this year, the memory still lives on in all of us, doesn't it? There's a lot of people who remember some pretty special old-time shows from back in the day of the golden age of radio. I'm going to put a little extra piece in here for you because most people would never see this stuff. If you've ever heard of ratings, books for television, radio, you'd understand exactly what I'm going with this. The medium of radio became so popular, it started being gathered, data started being gathered in the early 30s. Let's take a look. In Boston from 1930, look at this. This is actual ratings in Boston, Massachusetts of radio sets, not television, and the station's percentage of the market at each what we call day part, which is day part of the day of the hour of the day in 6-hour increments. And it shows 6 a.m. to 12 noon, then 12 noon to 5 p.m., then 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. That would be considered prime time back in the 30s. 8 p.m. to 12 midnight would be late night, from 1930s standards. But this gives you an idea of the big stations that were listening back then in 1930. Here's Chicago, and take a look at this. Chicago, WBBM, that was CBS, and you can kind of see where the numbers were for each one of these, and we'll get to what network each one of these at the top is right here. If you take a look very, very carefully at the bottom, we get a little better view of that. WBBM was CBS, WENR was NBC Blue, WGN was the Mutual Broadcasting System, and WMAQ was NBC Red. And you can see for each part of the day how well each network did. CBS was a leader from the early 30s on in radio dramas. They produced some of the best programming in all of radio. And then we take a look here. Look at a station audience book from October of 41 to April of 1942. This is where the production, in broadcasting, the word book came from, because they used to be a book, a physical book that the program director and general manager would look at for their station and find out how well that they did in the marketplace. They were called books because of this back then. Here's Chicago, 1942. Gives you an idea. And look at how they break down the times of day here of the different stations that are there in Chicago. And they really only list the ones that are the network affiliates at the top. Los Angeles in 1942, this gives you an idea of the different stations there in Los Angeles. KFI at that point, I believe, was CBS, and I believe KE, wait a minute, it might be different here. I believe it was KNX was CBS. KFI, I believe, was NBC. But this was the way the book worked out for 1942. Here's New York for 1942 and the different stations that were there. And, clearly you can see even the originals, WEAF, which was initially the flagship for NBC, wasn't even red or blue yet. It was simply the NBC network back in the day. And then, of course, you have WJZ, which was part of what would become the NBC Blue Network, listed right there. 1945, Altoona, Pennsylvania. And we move on to 1945, Boston, Massachusetts. These are radio ratings, not television ratings. And this shows the various stations from 1945. Here's 1945 from Chicago, Illinois. And here is 1945 from Los Angeles, California. And you can see the networks right there. CBS was KNX at that point. NBC was KFI. ABC was KECA. And the Mutual Broadcasting System was KHJ. Look at CBS again. Huge ratings to 1945. CBS was probably the king of the golden age of radio, but NBC, at one point red and blue, and then NBC, ABC, and Mutual did their best to try and catch up. But often it was CBS who got the biggest stars and often had the biggest shows as well. Golden age of radio. Hope you guys enjoyed that segment. It was a heck of a show to produce, and I really mean it when I say thank you for spending the time with me to do that. I appreciate it very much. All right. Let me see if we can catch up. I know your comments have been there, and I appreciate y'all being here. Robert, thank you for the call, the nice words here. And Richie in UK, thank you for being, Wisconsin, pardon me. Richie, thank you for being a part. I've enjoyed this with you. I really have. We've had a fun time. Gary, thank you for being here. Appreciate you as well. What I'm going to do is, my plan is to come back and finish up the show because I'd like this to stand as its own segment. The golden age of radio was so important to us in the States, and it really helped to pave the way for television. But radio was the theater of the mind. And I hope you had a little few moments there in that last hour and a half where it worked. All right. I'll see you guys in a few minutes. We'll finish the show with the rest of the elements we usually do. Come on back if you'd like. My name's Larry. My call sign, Amateur Radio, is Kilo 7 Hotel November. Don't leave yet. We do a show about radio. Really, we talk about radio here, not just shortwave or amateur radio. We talked a lot about the golden age of radio today. We just love radio here. If you'd like to join us, feel free and come back anytime. Wherever you may be in this great world, God bless you, and thanks for watching the golden age of radio on Ham Radio Live. Goodbye, everybody.